Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special evening of questions and answers with Noam Chomsky. I'm Diana Johnstone, an American journalist who has been described as belonging to the Chomsky school, which I consider a compliment. I know that our honored guest tonight truly needs no introduction. Just a few personal words. I first met Noam Chomsky in 1971 in the context of the movement against the American war in Vietnam that was devastating Vietnam. There was opposition to this war from what was then called the old left and the new left, but I would suggest that it also marked the beginning of what I would call the Chomsky left, which was different from both. It was based essentially on facts, without concern for the conflicting ideologies of the Cold War. Chomsky made a crucial distinction between power intellectuals, whom he called the new mandarins, who built careers justifying the dominant powers, and intellectuals who remain apart from power and whose work is aimed at informing their fellow citizens of the facts and realities which are often concealed by official propaganda. The intellectuals of the Chomsky left do not attach themselves to any power-holding or power-seeking ideology. Rather, they put their hope in the capacity of the people to understand the world and to change it. They try to contribute to this process without aspiring to dominate it. Two major figures of the Chomsky left are here this evening. Jean Bricmont, professor of mathematical physics at the University of Louvain, is well known to many of you. He is co-author with Alain Sokal of the book Imposture Intellectuelle, whose American title is a better title, Fashionable Nonsense, as well as Impérialisme Humanitaire, and many articles on scientific and political subjects. With Julie Franck, he co-edited a major volume of collected texts on Chomsky for the French editor Léon. As a follow-up, Léon published in its Carnet series 2 long interviews with Chomsky by Jean Bricmont entitled Raison, contre, pouvoir, le pari de Pascal. With us also is another leading expert on Chomsky, Noam BAILLARGEON, professor of philosophy of education at the University of Quebec in Montreal. Professor BAILLARGEON has co-edited with David Balsamian a conversation with Chomsky published in 2002, and last year published 2 works on education, Réflexion sur l'université and Pour une éducation humaniste, both including introductions by and interviews with Noam Chomsky. This evening, Professors BAILLARGEON and Bricmont, who already know a lot about Noam Chomsky's thought, are going to try to find out still more. The questions are designed to be difficult and are not just their own questions, but questions that are in the air, so to speak, and are not meant to give our honored guest an easy time. The intention is to divide the session into 3 or possibly 4 segments, each only 15 or 20 minutes long, in order to allow some questions for the floor in about an hour. Welcome, Professors Chomsky, BAILLARGEON, and Bricmont. Gentlemen, fire away.
Does this work? It works? Okay, thank you. Thank you for this introduction. I used to speak of the Chomsky left, actually, and I used to say in the old days, when I was trying to make him better known, that we would have a World Congress in a telephone booth. But things have changed a little, I think, since then. Anyway, the first question, let's not be too optimistic. The first question is, what is the political relevance of intellectuals such as you? Playing what he called devil's advocate, Bertrand Russell wrote in the 1950s that the fate of the world depends on, I quote, the decisions of Khrushchev, Mao, and Dulles. Dulles was Secretary of State of the United States under Eisenhower at that time. Russell added, they do not read our books and would find them very silly if they did. Things have changed since then, but the power is still concentrated in the hands of relatively few people, at the head of the IMF, the World Bank, the Pentagon, the World Trade Organization, etc. What difference do you think people like you or us can make? In case you reply that the general public has an influence on leaders, the same question arises. Do they read our books?
For my part, I would like to know something about the anarchist. The problem of relevance and influence is even more acute for anarchist fellow travelers, as you often describe yourself. For the fact is that mass-based anarchism movements have been defeated and have essentially disappeared long ago. One could in fact reasonably argue that the actual movement is weak, disorganized, and full of sectarian quarrels. So, my first question, what is the relevance and the meaning of anarchism today? And what do you think are those least desirable aspects of today's anarchism that should be addressed and corrected if the movement is to have relevance in today's struggles?
The Russell quote, it makes sense. It's a good answer to, it's a good response to a slogan that's familiar among activists. It's actually a slogan used by some of my close friends in the activist movement, particularly the Quaker activists, very good, very courageous people, constantly engaged not only in protest, but in the resistance, civil disobedience. And their slogan is that you have to speak truth to power. And Russell's response, I think, is an apt response to the idea that you should speak truth to power. There's no point speaking truth to Stalin, Khrushchev in his day, Mao and Dulles. They don't want to hear it, or they know it. But I think we shouldn't accept the slogan in the first place, for many reasons. For one thing, Russell's reasons. For another thing, that's not our audience. As Jean pointed out, it's people who can create conditions under which the leadership is compelled to make decisions. Actually, we've seen that in what's being called the Arab Spring. Even the dictators have to respond to organized public opinion, and it's plainly much more true in more free societies. And it's not just a matter of influencing leaders, but also throwing them out, replacing them, in fact, eliminating leadership altogether. So power is the wrong audience. The audience is people who can influence power or assume power. Also, the idea of speaking truth to them, it doesn't seem to me to capture the right concept. For one thing, who are we to speak truth? Do we have some special insight into the truth? I mean, we do our best, other people do their best. So you should be speaking what you best, presenting your best understanding of complex affairs of the world and human life. And you shouldn't be speaking to them. Ideally, what you should be doing is what a good teacher should be doing, speaking with them, interacting with them, learning from them. That is constantly the case in serious dialogue. So the right idea should be speaking with people who are are part of the general public, and concerned and committed to improving, changing, maybe overthrowing structures of power and dominance, and learning with them, encouraging them to, using what resources you have. Most of us we're privileged, so we have access to resources, to training, and so on, and that can contribute to popular movements. It always does, but also learning from them. Well, Jean asked, do they need our books? Well, that's up to them. actually, I think they probably do, at least they devour them. And it has an effect, and there's an interacting effect. It changes the kind of things one writes and speaks. So I think, though I kind of agree with the criticism, I think it's not directed to the true issues at hand. As to the anarchist movements, first of all, there weren't many mass-based anarchist movements. There was one major one in Spain in 1936. And that one was indeed destroyed by the joint efforts of the communists, the fascists, and the liberal democracies. They all wanted to destroy the anarchist revolution. They then turned to squabbling with each other about what was left. Other mass popular movements continued to develop, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, but I don't feel quite as defeatist about it as Norman's comment suggests. Even if the anarchist movements dissolve, they penetrate other activist movements. Most of the activism that I know of, including current activism tracing back many years, is inspired by anarchist elements. They may not call themselves anarchists, but the concept of addressing structures of dominance and hierarchy and challenging them, that's been a core feature of modern activist movements, as of earlier ones, many which would not at all call themselves anarchists. The feminist movement, for example, was challenging deeply entrenched structures of domination, of subordination, raising consciousness about the imperative of understanding that subordination is not an act of life, approaching others to try to get them to think through their own assumptions that somehow orders have to be given and others have to take them. The same is true of the workers' movements, of peasant movements, indigenous movements. I mean, the indigenous movements of Latin America, for example, that would not call themselves anarchist, but they are, in fact, expressing, developing in their own way, in their resistance and their achievements, the same concepts. In fact, these concepts just arise spontaneously all the time in activist movements, individual lives, and so on. And insofar as the anarchists, those who call themselves anarchists or draw explicitly from the anarchist tradition, insofar as they can contribute to all of this, it's just fine. As to the least desirable aspects of anarchism, there are many. One of them is the extreme sectarian character of the organized movements. Just to illustrate, the one place where there remain for a long time still are large active anarchist movements is still in Spain. They revived after the Franco dictatorship ended. They were sort of deeply rooted in people's consciousness and understanding. And the major anarchist trade movement, CNT, just still function.